Good evening. Hi. Welcome to the Red Hen Press Poetry Hour, brought to you by the Broad at Home. I'm your host tonight, Sandra Tsing Loh, and standing in for the beautiful Broad stage in Santa Monica, my messy living room in Pasadena, conveniently darkened so you don't see the mess. And we're streaming to you now via Facebook Live. And because we are coming to you live, we do ask you to tell us what you're thinking in the comments section. We imagine you two are in your living rooms, perhaps less messy than mine. You are clinking champagne, you are baking bread, you're doing whatever you might do on a Saturday night. So tell us what you're having, and more importantly, what you think of the poems and the poetry and the poets that you'll be hearing. And we'll try to weave that in the conversation as we go. So to kick off, first of all, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce co-founder and managing editor of Red Hen Press, Kate Gale.
Hi, good to see you.
Hey.
Yes.
Hey, Kate. You're so beautifully illuminated, and I'm a little dark. I'm going to fix that. Okay. And also, please, let's welcome to the program artistic and executive director of the Broad Stage, Rob Bayless.
Hi, how are you?
Hey. Ooh, claret color jacket. It's good to see you guys. So, man, fifth weekend. What are your thoughts this evening, Kate?
Well, I'm very excited about tonight's program. When I was kind of coming up as a poet, I was really into Adrienne Rich and Judy Grahn, and then later started really reading Ellen. And so this kind of feels like a homecoming. And then when Red Hen started as a press, the first press that really was so gracious in mentoring us was Copper Canyon. And so they just helped us so much and gave us so many great ideas. And so I'm so excited that that this is a Copper Canyon poet that we have on tonight. And this book is so magnificent that Ellen's going to be reading to us from. All of these poets that are going to be reading tonight are absolutely amazing. So this is just such a fantastic show that I just can't wait. So I'm really excited about tonight.
Rob?
Oh my goodness. I mean, the lineup is terrific. So I'm really excited about all of that. And I've also been thinking this week a lot of, as the news is getting less generic and more specific about different responses to the situation we're in and different responses to how this deadly virus is affecting different communities, it's starting to surface the stories within each of these communities and how different they really are and how different those impacts are. And I think in many ways, this group of poets is very well situated to speak to those many different voices. And I think that'll be really a wonderful thing to hear. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I also wanted to ask you guys the question of the week, which is, for me this week, I noticed that certain elements of time started to just disappear completely, like just gone. So I'm not sure I know what a deadline is anymore. I'm not sure I know how the day works. And I'll give you my one example from today, which was, it was beautiful out today. Despite all we're going through, it was gorgeous out today. And I thought, I'm going to get up early with the dog and we're going to go for an earlier walk than usual. And we got up early before it got really hot, and we went for a 2-hour walk, and I thought, this is great. And I got home and we had our breakfast, and about 5 minutes later, which is his usual walk time, he's like, it's time for a walk. It's time for it is now time for my walk. And I just started to think about that for myself, like how many things have changed and how many things you're relying on and where your instincts are for relying on it. It just really came up for me this week. So I wonder for each of you, what about time has gotten really slippery or changed for you in the last week?
Well, for me, actually, just since the pandemic happened, it seems like I've lost track of time and of my schedule. I like normally would be going to bed earlier, and I feel like I'm going to bed later and later. And also, I think this is a fairly typical thing, that once you're working from home, you never stop working. And so you're just working all the time. You work, and when you go out for walks, you're on the phone with people, having work phone meetings all the time. And so basically, I'm working, and so I've lost track of any time for myself or whatever. And so time has become just kind of irrelevant because when I am awake, I am working.
Yeah.
Today's actually my birthday, and so I didn't work today. I feel very proud that this is my only, I'm just having fun with poetry, I'm telling myself right now. But basically, except for today, during this pandemic, I have just slipped into this time mass when I'm always working. And it's a little bit crazy. And I think part of it is that we're working from home. And so I've lost control of my personal space in a way that's probably not all that good, but also is partly because, as Rob knows, when you're working for an arts organization, it does feel a little tiny bit like an emergency. I don't want to make this sound dire at all, but it feels a little bit like you should be working pretty hard.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know this about arts organizations during pandemics, it feels a little bit like you are running quickly. So yeah, I feel like time has come to mean almost nothing. Like I wake and work and sleep and work and move very quickly.
There's a lot of birthday wishes out there for you. Shantae Roberts, Catherine Shore, Naomi Williams, Georgina Marie, Dorothy Richards. There will be many. Charles Harper West. So I'll keep shouting them out as we go. For me, they say kind of Thursday is now called Blur's Day, and Friday is now called Fuzz Day. I still don't know what Saturday is called, but maybe by the end of this program, someone can suggest what we'll call Saturday.
We got the right people online for that one.
Yeah.
What's the name for Saturday? And on that note, we'd like to turn to our featured poet this evening, Ellen Bass.
Wonderful.
Ellen Bass's newest collection, Indigo, was published by Cobber Canyon Press in April this month. Her other poetry books include Like a Beggar, The Human Line, and Mules of Love. Her poems have frequently appeared in The New Yorker, The American Poetry Review, New York Times Magazine, Atlantic, American Poetry Review, New Republic, Kenyon Review, Plowshares, so many. Among her also many awards are fellowships from the NEA, California Arts Council, 3 Pushcart Prizes, 3, the Lambda Literary Award, the Pablo Neruda Prize, the Larry Levis Prize, and the New Letters Prize. A Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, Bass founded poetry workshops at Salinas Valley State Prison and the Santa Cruz, California jails, and teaches in the MFA writing program at Pacific University. And she joined us from Santa Cruz, where it is 8:08 in the evening. Welcome, Ellen.
Oh, I'm happy to be here with you all. Thanks so much for inviting me.
We're
Welcome.
so happy to have you. And I'm not going to derail the direction that we're going, but as I told you, I have, in your honor, made some oyster stew this evening. I'm going to shut my computer down because otherwise I'll spill it.
I want to see.
Yeah, okay, but otherwise it looks strange, but it's really good in honor of the bivalves that live
The
in
bivalve, yeah.
which you'll get to eventually. You don't have to start. But the first question really is, kind of how you're doing as a poet and a person in this particular time. And Like a Beggar, you were talking about the harder the times, the more important to praise.
I think that is, just true now. During the time when I wrote my previous book, Like a Beggar, I was going through a difficult personal time. And now, of course, we're going through a global difficult time. And poetry is so important now. And we see people who didn't even think they liked poetry turning to poetry. And we see that always in very difficult times. We see it personally at funerals and other times when saying things straight out doesn't really get to say what it is that you feel. I mean, poetry tries to say the unsayable, because when you say certain things straight out, they're reduced. It becomes not really what you mean. And so we have to look for ways to speak not just to our more literal minds and not in language that is so overused that although we recognize it as a sign for something, it doesn't actually reach inside and do something to us in our hearts, in our bodies, which is what poetry does. Poetry gives you an experience. A good poem gives you an experience. It doesn't tell you about something. It makes you feel it. It gives you the chance to feel it. And I think we are needing, I certainly am, we are needing that ability to connect with each other on a very deep level, especially because we're not being able to connect with each other, except maybe one or a few other people. Or if you are living in a house with a lot of people, then you're trying to get away from those people to some extent. But the normal amount of connection in and out and back and forth isn't there. And I think that poems give us a chance to do that. They give us a chance to connect, one solitude with another. And they also give us a chance to grapple with whatever the reality is. I have a little scotch taped quote on my laptop that I look at all the time, and it's from Marcel Proust, and he says, "The purpose of the artist is to draw back the veil that leaves us indifferent before the universe." And I think that all art tries to do that. That's what poetry tries to do. It tries to open us up enough that we can care and that we can share from our own lives, that we can be compassionate for others, and not just other people, but the whole living world, and that we can in some way bear witness to this world as it is, and not fight it. I don't mean not fight for justice and not fight to save the earth and things like that. Of course, we want to be fighting for that just as much as we can, but not resist what there is for us to deal with. Not resist. There's a musician, Stephen Nachmanovich, and he says, "I'm not in the creativity business. I'm not in the music business. I'm in the surrender business." And I think that is really it with poetry, and it with any spiritual practice. I mean, poetry is my religion, so that is how I grapple with things. And surrender is not easy for me. On the bell curve, I'm over toward the control end. So this surrender is not easy, but it's so big that we really can't fight it. It's happening. And so then it becomes, well, how do you respond to something that is so tragic, that is so stressful? And poetry helps me do that, because one of the things that happens for me with poetry is that it says to me, this is part of the human experience. And you can want just the good bits, but that's not what a life is. And so if you want to be in your life, then you got to take it all.
So on that note, would you like to read us a couple of surrender and read us a couple of poems?
I'd like to do that, yes. And I think I'll start with the oyster poem. It's called Reincarnation, but we all just always call it the oyster poem. Reincarnation. Who would believe in reincarnation if she thought she would return as an oyster? Eagles and wolves are popular. Even domesticated cats have their appeal. It's not terribly distressing to imagine being Missy, nibbling kibble and lounging on the windowsill. But I doubt the toothsome oyster has ever been the totem of any shaman fanning the motherpiece tarot or smudging with sage. Yet perhaps we could do worse than aspire to be a plump bivalve. Humbly, the oyster persists in filtering seawater and fashioning the daily irritations into luster. Dash a dot of Tabasco, pair it with a dry martini. Not only will this tender button inspire an erotic fire in tuxedoed men and women whose shoulders gleam in candlelight, this hermit praying in its rocky cave, this anchorite of iron, calcium, and protein, is practically a molluscan saint, revered and sacrificed, body and salty liquor of the soul. The oyster is devoured, surrendering all, again and again, for love.
I love that poem so much. It turns and it goes so many different ways. Yes. Well, please read more. It's such a pleasure to hear you read.
Oh, thank
Read
you.
more. Read more.
I'm going to read this one. It's my dear dog Zeke is no longer with us, but I wrote this poem as he was quite old, taking my old dog out to pee before bed. Zeke's hips are too ground down to lift a leg, so he just stands there. We both just stand, looking into the darkness. The moon silvers his thinning fur. Orion strides across the heavens, his own dog trotting at his heel. And a great live oak reaches over from the neighbor's yard, dense black limbs silhouetted against a paler sky. Single voluptuous remnant of forests. Can a tree be lonely? Zeke tips up his muzzle, scent streaming through 200 million olfactory cells as he reads the illuminated manuscript of night. Raccoons prowling down the street, who's in heat or just out for a stroll. Handsome still, he reminds me of an aging movie star with his striking white eyebrows and square jaw. He always had an urbane elegance, a gentleman who could carry off satin lapels and a silver-tipped cane. Tonight, an ambulance wails. Someone not so far away is frightened, in pain, trying to live or trying to die. And then it's quiet again. No birds, no wind. We don't speak. We just wait, alive together, until one of us turns back to the door and the other follows.
How about 2 more poems? Would you?
I'd love to. I'm going to read the title poem from the new book. I'll show it to you. I think it's so beautiful. Indigo. As I'm walking on Westcliff Drive, a man runs toward me, pushing one of those jogging strollers with shock absorbers, so the baby can keep sleeping, which this baby is. I can just get a glimpse of its almost translucent eyelids. The father is young, a jungle of indigo and carnelian, tattooed from knuckle to jaw, leafy vines and blossoms, saints and symbols. Thick wooden plugs pierce his lobes, and his sunglasses testify to the radiance haloed around him. I'm so jealous, as I often am. It's a kind of obsession. I want him to have been my child's father. I want to have married a man who wanted to be in a body, who wanted to live in it so much that he marked it up like a book, underlining, highlighting, writing in the margins, I was here. Not like my dead ex-husband, who was always fighting against the flesh, who sat for hours on his zafu chanting Om, and then went out and broke his hand punching the car. I imagine when this galloping man gets home, he's going to want to have sex with his wife, who slept in late, and then he'll eat barbecued ribs and let the baby teeth on a bone while he drinks a dark beer. I can't stop wishing my daughter had had a father like that. I can't stop wishing I'd had that life. Oh, I know. It's a miracle to have a life, any life at all. It took 8 years for my parents to conceive me. First there was the war, and then just waiting. And my mother's bones so narrow, she had to be slit and I airlifted. That anyone is born, each precarious success, from sperm and egg to zygote, embryo, infant, is a wonder. And here I am alive, almost 70 years, and nothing has killed me. Not the car I totaled running a stop sign, or the spirochete that screwed into my blood. Not the tree that fell in the forest exactly where I was standing, my best friend shoving me backward so I fell on my ass as it crashed. I'm alive, and I gave birth to a child. So she didn't get a father who'd sling her onto his shoulder. And so much else she didn't get. I've cried most of my life over that. And now there's everything that we can't talk about. We love that cannot take too much of each other. Yet she is the one who, when I asked her to kill me, if I no longer had my mind, we were on our way into Ross, shopping for dresses. That's something she likes, and they all look adorable on her. She's the only one who didn't hesitate or refuse or waver or flinch. As we strode across the parking lot, she said, "Okay, but when's the cutoff? That's what I need to know." And I'll end with the last poem in the book, which I wrote out of a personal desolation, but is more relevant than we all wish it would be right now. It's called Any Common Desolation. Any common desolation can be enough to make you look up at the yellowed leaves of the apple tree, the few that survived the rains and frost, shot with late afternoon sun. They glow a deep orange gold against a blue so sheer, a single bird would rip it like silk. You may have to break your heart, but it isn't nothing to know even one moment alive. The sound of an oar in an oarlock, or a ruminant animal tearing grass. The smell of grated ginger, the ruby neon of the liquor store sign, warm socks. You remember your mother, her precision a ceremony, as she gathered the white cotton, slipped it over your toes, drew up the heel, turned the cuff. A breath can uncoil as you walk across your own muddy yard, the Big Dipper pouring night down over you, and everything you dread, all you can't bear, dissolves, and, like a needle slipped into your vein, that sudden rush of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the great Ellen Bass. And know that Ellen will be back in about 15 minutes. We're going to do some other live poets, and we're going to chat a little further, maybe do a little dish. Maybe I will ask you, you study poetry with Anne Sexton. What was that like? So stay tuned for that in about 15 minutes, and we'll come back with Ellen. Thank you so much. In case you've just joined us, this is the Red Hen Press Poetry Hour presented by the Broad at Home. And we're streaming to you live via Facebook, as your comments are letting us know as they come in. A lot of happy birthdays to Kate Gale, of course, Taurus, we like that. Dorothy Richards, Geronimi, Amy Wack, Liz Kempford, Lester Graves, Lennon, stay Taurus strong. I love that. Allison Joseph is here. Yay. From last week, we heard her wonderful poet, Francisco Aragon, Chris Beaver, Patricia Salgado. I'll do more. And to begin with, I think we have a going guess of like, if Thursday is Thursday and Friday is Fuzz Day, what is Saturday? Harlan Rotblatt has the first vote in on behalf of fans of Molluscan Saints and Dry Martinis Everywhere. My vote for Saturday's pandemic alter ego, Saturday. Very nice. Okay. So next, we're going to turn to a couple of poets who are live here with us tonight who we're really happy to have. First up, we have Dexter L. Booth.
Hi, everybody. I am going to read just two poems to you today. And very quickly before I start, I'm working on a project that is a 3-act minstrel show in which the characters in the show are the crows, a persona of the crows from Disney's Dumbo, which I'm sure you've all seen. The only thing you need to know about this first poem is that it's from the perspective of Fat Crow. And in this collection I'm writing, Fat Crow is sort of like Kenny from South Park. If you've ever seen South Park, Kenny is sort of killed and comes back each episode. And so this is after being killed once. Fat Crow comes back and is having a conversation with Henry, John Barrowman's Henry from the Dream Songs. Fat Crow explains living to Henry Pussycat. Honey dust do sprawl, Sir Bones. Them white faces powdered clownish when they find out next time we died, a white woman's lips nipped the tick of our tongue, inhaled strong all the water from the Atlantic, gulped the splintered ships, the splintered bodies in Manila from the moisture and cells. Gas so strong, muscle and bone slid from our bosom sack of gelatin feathers. She munched our fibula and clavicle, picked her teeth with our phalanges. And when we was a puddle on the grass, thinking this love, her brother came to bleed oil from my brother's nuts. That's when we learned to whistle. Whistle loud enough, and under a microscope you can see our cells weeping, buck broken and drowned and drugged behind trucks and horses. Cartoon death. Wet cells, transparent crispy cells with rope burns round their adenine and thymine. Cells like bullet holes and brown booty holes, and cells with names. Sandra Bland and Joe cells, fuming with the swamps, Simmons, Georgia, with the bones and the sewage from the plant built in spite of the bones next. Cells where they chalk out lines of nameless darkies, shaken every time a pig in a hat walks by. These cells with tiny chicks and niggas stuffed inside they center correctional facility for broken spirits, who knows selling drugs is just selling faith, trades hands like dollars. Dirty, dirty niggas' faces, dirty, dirty niggas' records. We is our own shine. Be endless in our juke and jive. The second and last poem I'll share with you is from the perspective of Glasses Crow. And in this manuscript, Glasses Crow is constantly being abducted by the Klan, and they are trying to baptize him. And so this is right before he's baptized by Klan members. Glasses Crow puts on his white voice to say some professional Negro shit. 1. There is a boy who needs to speak, but his mouth is stuffed with a flag. I use both hands and help tug it out. It's longer than you'd expect, and real work. The boy is clearly in pain. When the flag is out, the boy smiles, and I can see that his teeth are not teeth. His gums are stuffed with pills. He grinds them to dust. He is trying to tell me something about being. Every time a white man dresses in blackface, a crow unzips itself and a black baby falls out. Every day Mickey Mouse puts on his gloves, a white man grows wings. A governor's college yearbook went national with a photo of a man in a Klan robe and another in blackface. The governor swore it wasn't his after claiming it was his. He swore it wasn't because he remembered another time he wore blackface as Michael Jackson. Recap. A white man in power dressed as a black man who looked like a white man and maybe molested white children. Blackface? Whiteface? When questioned about this, my mother says it doesn't matter. It's about what he does for black people now, not what he did in college. I take a pill every time a black mother cries on the news. I smoke a joint every time another anchor says the cop who killed me will walk away. Every black baby on this boat is named Jim Crow. Scholar W.T. Lamont says that Thomas Rice, the first Jim Crow, was really subversive. That because his retelling of Othello left Desdemona alive and with a Negro offspring, Rice was saying to his white audience what black folk wanted to but couldn't. He disarmed his audiences with his mask. How foolish the Negro Jim Crow looks. But at his heart, he's not a crow or a nigger. That white man can speak and he can jump Jim Crow. Have I lost my words? I have. I am a black man in an eggshell world. I am a black man in a world made for pearls. And have I lost my nerve? I have. I am a black man afraid to love ghosts, afraid of what they carry in their mouths, their jaws full of sharp red grass. And if you look to your left, just near the trees, you'll see a black woman leaping from a garret window. She does this every day, forever. Each morning the white man tells her she's been sold, and she and her children are going to Georgia, but she can't say goodbye to her husband because, well, she's a fucking slave, and niggers don't get the luxury of farewells. So each night she launches from the window. She cannot die. spend days in the air, held in the arc of the sky, given nothing. Let's write a version where she floats her Mary Poppins best down the street. In this version, you can sing your children back into your womb, and she does. They crawl out into the sky and pack themselves back into her stomach. There's space in them. There's space in there for all of them. Here, all Black women singing can raise the dead. 2. There's a mosque in my throat. A skinhead appears and reads from his manifesto. It is long. As he reads, other white nationalists gather to hear. We are smashed into this boat-turned praise cabin. White bodies pile in through the door, spill over and consume the pews. White bodies spill in through the windows and through the floors like trolls. There's a mosque in my throat. There are red hats in every book in this praise cabin turned church. I know this. The skinhead reads from his manifesto. Long live the peach-faced god of disillusion. If you wash yourself in the river of darkened blood, if you exfoliate the chambers of your heart in the river of darkened blood, if you purify your way of dark and piss, you can press into him, become him. I listen to every word, and when he is done, he opens my mouth and says, there is a church in your throat. The praise cabin, turned. It doesn't matter. He climbs inside. My heart doesn't break. It bursts. It regenerates, then bursts again. It is a forest, my heart, and it is black. And in that forest, the trees bear fruit that look like Aunt Jemima statues. Correction. The trees are Aunt Jemima statues. My heart is black. It is a forest. And in that forest, the trees don't grow. Before I leave, I'd like to thank Kate Gale. Happy birthday to Kate. Everyone at Red Hen Press, the Broad Museum for putting this on. I'm very grateful to be here. Thanks to John for making sure you guys can see and hear me tonight. Thanks to Sandra. Thanks to Ellen, Keith, and Sam for sharing the stage. It's an honor to share the stage with everyone. And thanks to everyone out there watching. I hope that you and your family are healthy and safe.
Thank you, Dexter. If you've just joined us, this is the Red Hen Poetry Press Hour, and brought to you by the Broad at Home. And we are streaming live, and we see you, Ilan Engelan Mazzini, Alexandra Umlast. We see that you're there. And Ellen Bass will be back shortly. But in the meantime, we have Keith Flynn.
Hello, everyone. Tonight I am reading from White Rock Hall, which is a 100-year-old church that I picked up and moved to the top of this mountain. And we have a website called live@whiterockhall.com, where you can see we paired nationally known poets with regional musicians, and then we film the collaborations live. So that happens in this studio, in the sanctuary here. And I thought the first poem that I'm going to read is called The Glory Facade. It's the facade on the cathedral that's designed by Gaudí in Barcelona, the Sagrada de la Familia. And it's not finished yet, but it's his most powerful piece of architecture. He said that he designed it for the glory of Jesus. The Glory Facade. No one gets the life they deserve. Eternity is not the endless passage of time, uninterrupted. It is contained in a single moment where time has stopped, a frozen moat, a conversation with a stone. Each year a column, slowly tilting. God is the only architect, said Gaudí. I'm merely copy. He became a studious imitator of the tree, the river, the wind. Light builds everything. Strings of light torn from sheer blocks, streamers inviting you to reconnect them, the tails of comets, the rocket's smoky trail, mixed among vaporous clouds, mist off a boiling pot, the searching vines, restless rivulets. Gaudi was killed by a streetcar, seditiously moored to its tracks, unable to pass through him or follow his immense light. Buildings are made of music, rising with purpose, filling the air's geometry with forms, and music is able to persuade without argument. Cities should be built from the worship of nothing in particular and filled with the feelings of its people, the only mortar that can reinforce the beams. From this, I make my life a bell and hurl its chime across the expanse, and a gong of years develops, buttressed by nothing. The spool of that life is filled with temporary commotions, knowing that a human being in love with mystery is never finished. I want to say happy birthday, Kate, and a shout out to Red Hen Press. This is the new book, The Skin of Meaning. I'm going to read one more poem from that collection. This is called Le Papillon. It was written about in the early 19th century when stages were lit. They were typically lit by incandescent calcium oxide light. And in around 1816, 1820, Thomas Drummond developed that, and they were really, really bright. It was essentially made from lime. That's where the phrase limelight came from, because they were a lot of times performers would stand back in the shadows and then they would walk forward and stand into the light. And that's where being in the limelight was eventually developed. Also, the idea of the green room, it was discovered that the lights were so bright that a lot of performers, once they got a break from the stage, would go to a backstage area that was painted in an almost deep emerald green. And that green calmed the brightness and calmed their eyes down. And that became known as the green room. So later on, as phosphorus became and gas became more popular as the footlights for performances, particularly for operas and ballets, several times there were ballerinas that got too close to the footlights. And as a consequence, they caught on fire. And there was like tissue. Their tutus were built from tissue and very flammable materials. And more than one ballerina lost her life in the end of the 19th century. Emma Livery was probably the most famous of those ballerinas. And this poem is dedicated to her memory. This is called Le Papillon. This is not the righteous blue flame that engulfs the monk, or the sherbet agent of invisible acid dropped by the barrel on the naked children of starving villages in South Vietnam. This is not the 80-proof orange vodka cocktail lit by the freebasing Richard Pryor, a black adder addled by self-loathing, who poured the fire over his head and ran screaming into the void. This is not the match strike under the cooking spoonful, any more than it is the convulsive propulsion shivering into massive tendrils that annihilate the bloated Hindenburg in an avalanche of star-like implosion, a fire that blotted out a flying cathedral between its fingers. No. This is the personal and public incineration, snapping its jaws shut around the most delicate, jubilant wings. This is the interrupted, gravity-free white lance that burns straight through the curtain, the laser emitted by a magnifying glass as it focuses a ray of the sun on an unsuspecting dragonfly, the wisp of smoke almost a held breath of frost, let slowly out. Then the shards, red and jagged, slicing through the tutu's layers and igniting them, delicate as tissue paper, sticking to the ballerina's hips as she twisted away from the guilty footlights and swarmed into the backstage, 1,000 ingots of red and lavender knives exploding around her supple hands and shoulders, a galaxy of bees hiving her, a flare, a comet, and finally, a nest of ash, hoping to hold together in the wind.
Thank you. Amazing. Next up, Sam Sachs.
Hi. Happy Saturday, everybody. Kate, happy birthday. So honored to be reading with Ellen and Keith and Dexter. Fan of the poems for sure. And thank y'all at the Broad for having me, and John, thanks for organizing it on the back end. I was hoping to read some poems that I wrote while in quarantine. So if they're like unstable, that's the reason. Okay, cute. This first one, I discovered that you can review anything on Yelp, including like houses of worship. And I found out The Atlantic had a 4.6 on Yelp. So this is, that's the title. The Atlantic has a 4.6 on Yelp. And The Last Synagogue That Burned, 4.8. In a comment about the ocean, one man writes, extremely wet, won't go again. Another, too salty, 1 star. I come from a judgy people. We are gossiping birds. My family leaves a function and shows love by talking shit. Can you believe what was wearing how talked to his kid? Of the synagogue, quote, just so sad what happened here. 2 stars. Last night, I watched a documentary about a drag queen I thought I hated. One I even wrote cruelly about online. Called her undeserving. But during the film, I wept while she played guitar. How does anyone come to judge the ocean? In a review of the bombed out country my family fled a generation back, someone writes, beautiful country, no place on earth like it. At night, so many stars. Cool. So there's that. My partner is clapping from the other room. Thank you, Michael. I've also been writing this sequence of like outdoor sex poems sort of as a joke. Because I put on Twitter, I was like, I'm gonna write a series of outdoor sex poems called Pastoral, which is like the pastoral is like a form of, reverence of the natural world in poems. And then oral is like a kind of sex one can have, which I'm sure you are aware. What a weird thing to be talking into an aperture. So yeah, I made it as a joke, and then I started writing this sequence of poems. And so this is one of them. This is from when I worked at the Yerba Buena Gardens in San Francisco. One of my last jobs before poetry became my daddy was working security guarding flowers. I'd spend all day against a length of fence looking intimidating as a bagel, muttering language into a tape recorder, which then I'd go home to transcribe on a typewriter like a real piece of shit. Other days we'd set up stages and tents. After a tech conference, I was busy breaking down what we'd built pole by pole, placing them back into a long gray bag when I caught your eye. Laid out on a blanket, reading something pulpy. You were thick in the way I liked, but never had and was too scared to ask, so I did what I'd always done from childhood on, which was stare dumb as onion grass, and for the first time, you look back. I stepped clumsy into that resurrected language. You had a man at home, so I followed to the alley behind your building, where dumpsters bloom blue plastic wildflowers. We had each other this way a few times. In the shadows of some other shadow. Me kneeling to work after working. There was something deeply unwashed about you I can still taste when I put my hands in the earth. Years later, I learned your husband, a dom to a slew of pups, Dirty little colt, he broke each of you down only to remake you with pills and weights into the silhouette of painted bulls. Silicon injected into genitals gave you his name. I only realized it was you once one of you'd died, a lock and collar around your neck. I remember you now as you were then, inside your old body, moaning beside some trash cans, staring up at a blank patch of green sky. How, when I lifted your shirt to lick your stomach for the first time, I found the lonely tattoo of a dandelion. Cool. And then let me just do this last one real quick. Yeah, okay, it's called Household Theophanies, which is finding the image of Christ in your home, which I don't know anything about. The churches are empty as words. Due to war, they've emptied the churches. They've emptied the language of church. They've churched the language to war. War is the only church they know how to sell, to declare a border between church and worship. What is a house of worship without parishioners? What is a town without a cemetery? The cemeteries are booming. The cemeteries are successful at war. There is no war on crematoria. The burials unattended, the soil untended, microbial war, viral war, poverty war, amphetamine war. I've never trusted a church I couldn't break down and carry with me to a new town, that couldn't be prayed in by taking it into the mouth, by divine intervention, by divination, by doctrine. All trees are now churches, and the voices of neighborhood kids singing and their dogs as they've always been churches. Always the sound of poems are churches. Always the poem sounds growing worship out of the earth. Just this morning, the simple light falling on the empty street corner was so devastating. I had to sit down on the pavement just to praise it. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam. Poetry became your daddy. I will never forget that phrase. Ellen, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
Oh my goodness. There's so much to talk about.
What wonderful, wonderful poems. All of you. Thank you so much. I feel fed, nourished.
And it wasn't just my oyster stew. Can I go back to the question that I was wondering about, that you studied with Anne Sexton? You have such a lineage of can you say just what that was like?
Yes, I studied with Anne Sexton in 1970. I was in graduate school. In those days, the MFA wasn't called an MFA yet. It was called an MA. They had just begun these programs. And I was doing that at Boston University. And I think it was Anne's second year teaching there. She was a really wonderful teacher, very much not like her public persona, which was dramatic and flamboyant, and her poems are so intense, and she got so much criticism for that persona, as well as for her poems, which were speaking the truth about a woman's experience and her own experience so incredibly authentically, and also with such amazing mastery. And her craft, I think she's only beginning to get appreciated again, because there was so much dissing of her with that phrase that I hate so much of confessional poetry, which seems to put down the fact that there was enormous skill in making these poems, and that they were not confessions, they were made things, they were art. But as a teacher, going back to that, she was very thoughtful. She was very very much focused on the students and not on herself. There was no, I'm Anne and pay attention to me. It was really all about our work, very respectful. And I don't know if this is true, but in my imagination, I think that teaching was a place where she could be a certain self that maybe she didn't have so many other places to be, where she was very grounded and she knew what she was doing. She loved teaching, and she was very, very good at it.
And did she give you advice about your poetry?
Yes, she did. She didn't think all that much about my, she was not all that hot on my poetry, and it was not all that great. So
But
that's
you're
my opinion.
70 and above, you're still here. So she
Yeah,
didn't,
yeah.
yes.
She didn't think like, oh my God, how lucky am I to get this student? No, it wasn't like that at all. But this was my second semester, and the first semester, my professors all basically, I think that the teaching of poetry was not so sophisticated and brilliant as it is now, the teaching of the craft. I don't think people knew that well how to teach it. But certainly my professors essentially just kept saying, cut this out and cut that out. And the poems were not very good to start with, and they just made them smaller. And whatever little bit of life they had in them was crushed out of them. And Anne gave me the only advice that really I could utilize at that time. It was the perfect advice. And she said, expand, write more, just keep making these poems bigger instead of smaller, and let what you have to say, come out onto the page. And that encouragement, without her encouragement, I really don't know if I would have continued, because no one other than her gave me the least little bit of idea in graduate school. And when I was in college, I had a lot of support, and I met my first mentor, Florence Howe, who went on to become the co-founder of the Feminist Press. And so I had enormous support from her and from some other teachers. But in graduate school, no, it was all just delete, delete, delete.
Well, and I want to say, and this is, I think, my last question, but just to balance out what, so you have a legacy as a female poet, and you co-edited that the first female anthology of female poetry, and of course, The Oyster certainly is but you've been on the New Yorker poetry podcast a lot. I call you their most valuable player, and on the very first one, I believe, Philip Levine was on. And he picked a poem of yours, which was not a girly confessional poem at all, right? It's about slaughtering.
It's about slaughtering chickens. And yes, I don't know, no one really knows how other people talk about them. So I don't know how identified I am, as a woman poet. I really don't know. But yes, I was I was so thrilled when Phil Levine chose to talk about that poem, and it was I thought that it was a joke when my student sent me the link. I didn't know it was going to be on there, and I thought that she had some kind of technological prowess that allowed her to kind of do this spoof, and that it was like, oh right, Phil Levine's going to be talking about my poem, and and after I realized it was the real thing, I called my wife in and I said, listen to this. And afterward I said, okay, I hope other good things happen to me in the world of poetry, but if they don't, I could die happy. And yes, I think that what we I think that what every poem wants to be in its own way, even if it's a poem that is about something more charming than slaughter, is that it does want to have that cold, clear eye. And I think that's what I try and do is look with as cold a clear an eye as I can at whatever it is, whether it's love, whether it's motherhood, whether it's slaughtering chickens, and to just be as precise as I can be.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you, and your poetry is extraordinary. And
thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for making this happen. And thank you so much, poets, for sharing tonight.
And we actually have one more poet, Keith Flynn, who is going to play some music our first time with.
Hey folks, we're coming back to you again from White Rock Hall in Marshall, North Carolina. I'm going to do two things. The first one, I do a little tribute to the great late great Bill Withers, a song I've been singing all my life, and Withers was a spectacular influence as a singer. Lean on Me, a whole dozen of other, My Grandmother's Hands, lots of other songs, but he was a great songwriter as well. And when he retired in the middle 80s and went home, he was that extraordinary thing that I think is very rare, a very happy man. And the second thing I'm going to do, I'll be joined by Dan Wojner on guitar. You see him back over my left shoulder here. And we're going to do a song that I think is completely appropriate for this time, written by a friend of mine, Jimmy Hall. And it's called Keep On Smiling. The first thing I want to do, though, is just a little tribute to Bill Withers, whom I loved so much. And I'm sure everybody knows this song. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, only darkness every day, yeah. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, in this house it ain't no home, anytime she goes away, yeah, yeah. Don't know where it is she's gone. I don't know if she's gonna stay. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. In this house, Lord, it ain't no home. Anytime she goes away, yeah, yeah. Anytime she goes away, anytime she goes away. Well, you say you got the blues, you got holes in both of your shoes, yeah. When you're alone and confused, you gotta keep on smiling, keep on smiling. Well, you're about to go insane, 'cause your woman's playing games, and she says that you're to blame. You gotta keep on smiling, keep on smiling, keep on smiling, babe. Laughing all through the day, going through the changes until the sun comes out again. Well, you're playing in some honky-tonk cafe, nobody's hearing what you play, yeah. They're too busy drinking anyway. Gotta keep on smiling, keep on smiling. Well, you bought a piece of land, gonna change from a city boy to country man, yeah. Gonna build your life with your hands. Gotta keep on smiling, keep on smiling, keep on smiling, babe. Laughing up through the day, just going through the changes until the sun comes out again. You're hanging out in a local bar, and you're wondering who the hell you are. Are you a bum? Are you a star? Smiling, babe, laughing up through the day, going with the changes until the sun comes out again. Keep on smiling, loving, laughing, laughing, oh, just keep on laughing,
And I said, now, wanna keep on smiling, keep on loving, keep on smiling, keep on saying this refrain. Whoa. Thank you so much. Everybody keep smiling out there. Don't let the virus and the quarantine blues keep you down.
Thank you so much, Keith. We will. And thank you. That wraps up this Saturday's edition of the Red Hen Press Poetry Hour, brought to you by the Broad at Home. Thanks to our poets, featured poet Ellen Bass and Dexter L. Booth, Sam Sachs, Keith Flynn. Please join us next Saturday at 8 when our featured poet will be Camille Dungy. So follow Red Hen Press and the Broad Stage on all social media. And thank you very much for being here, all of you, and we see you there. I'm Sandra Tsing Loh. See you next week.